Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So thank you so much. I will endeavor to talk slowly. If I do not do this motion, and I will make that happen. So I'm here to talk about the economy and economics. And some of this isn't on the paper. I'm not really good at reading from a paper. But I hope we understand that economy and economics are at the baseline of everything we do. So it is actually about housing, gentrification, transportation, water is actually all about economics. And who gets access and who doesn't is all about white supremacy. So the story of economics and workers' rights for people of African descent in this country is rooted in the historical and current reality of slavery. Our culture, bones, blood, mother's milk, labor and bodies was the prime currency and the wealth building of the U.S. and the European Empire was built upon us as a people. White supremacy is the undercurrent of human rights abuses in the United States and is the root of economics and the lack of economic justice and freedom. The only way for economic justice to come to reality is for reparations in all forms to take place. This country was founded by corporations and corporate power, and the decision makers of this country were the same slave owners, KKK grand wizards, and the upholders of white supremacy. Reparations around African control of land, housing, jobs, healthcare, transportation, and even finance and trade. The two areas in which we very rarely talk about. We don't talk about trade even though we were traded here. We leave that conversation to other people. We don't talk about finance even though banking was built off of our bodies. And if we don't control finance, we will be lost forever. People of African descent have been underpaid and not paid for our entire history. And economic justice is not about one generation's fight for education, but is about the ancestral legacies of a people. An example that describes this is I was helping co-run a workshop around economics and governance 2 months ago, and we did a session on family history and ownership. The people of African descent, all Southern, mostly Mississippi, there were some people from Duck Hill, there were people from Jackson, a couple people in this room were there, people from 5 places in Mississippi were there. And people described their family histories in terms of economics as people who were consumers and owned, and having to work for a wage labor. There was a white woman in the room that said on the side that she realized that for 5 generations of her family, that not one person had to work if they didn't want to. Her mother was a Vanderbilt, and her father was a Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers are the banking that messed up most people's mortgages if they didn't want to. They made their money and other resources first off slave labor, plantations, and built their wealth through banking, insurance, and stealing land away from both people of African descent and our indigenous kin. This means that the people in the room currently had a different reality around wealth and who controlled the ability to make decisions that impacted their lives. That may not be what the current conversation is about, but that actually is our story. Workers' rights is around who and how one is able to have control over their labor and how people can work collectively together. This includes unionization, labor centers, and worker cooperatives. Historically, black people have pushed back against the white supremacy of labor unions and have used labor unions and cooperatives to build power and gain access to jobs and some level of wealth building. Because of this, we are least likely to be hired because we are more likely to join unions. And so every U.S. Southern state has made it extremely hard, difficult, and sometimes impossible to organize and start unions. The dismantling of public sector jobs and the unionization in the public sector has impacted people of African descent disproportionately. Some example is the closing of post offices, especially in rural counties, and the increased hiring of temporary workers. This impacts black women even more so with the gendering of jobs. And most black women working in the service industry are in companies and government-controlled facilities that do not allow for unionization. This is being lifted up right now through the National Domestic Workers Alliance, especially in Atlanta for black women, the Fight for 15 movement across the country, especially targeting fast food workers, and the campaign against Walmart. because Walmart has taken over jobs in small cities and rural areas. These all disproportionately impact people of African descent, and especially black women. I would also be remiss to not lift up what's happening to refugees and migrants of African descent that are in this country working on plantations or factory farms as domestic workers or in unsafe conditions in factories. And sometimes when we talk about people of African descent in this country, we don't talk about the many refugees and migrants that are in our communities that just move around the world as black people. Because we're all black together, even though there's some really particular things that happen. And I want to say that when we talk about policing, we talked about this some yesterday, that you cannot talk about economics without talking about the police and prison industry. And I know that'll come up later, but we talk about it often in terms of the wage labor, but we don't talk about it in terms of who's doing the bars, who's putting in the toilet stools, all those things that are actually about a prison economy and what it means that the prison economy is a faster growing economy in the world, and in our country especially. So the last piece I want to bring up before I pass it on is I'm currently studying and co-editing a book called Beautiful Solutions that lifts up solutions that people are doing across the world to transform the global economy. So I want to lift up human rights abuses that keep people of African descent in the South from community wealth building in this way too. Because we talk about the other, but don't even talk about this. The first is that we are a technology-based economy. And the access for people of African descent to access either jobs or job training in these areas is completely lacking. One major access challenge is the lack of internet. Even though people have fought and cities have gotten money for internet access, states have gotten money for internet access, who knows where it's going. And we're not talking about $1 million, we're talking about billions of dollars that keep going somewhere else. If you look at the percentage of people of African descent employed at the major tech companies, it is under 10%. So if you know the technology industry is where it's at, and we're not getting employed in those ways, and we're not being able to get access, then you're going to completely leave us out again in the future, not just now. Collective wealth building in many countries has been done through cooperatives, land trusts, participatory budgeting, and other means of democratic control. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives has been in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and every other state, has been fighting alongside black land loss organizations across the South because the federal government denied loans to black farmers from the 60s to the 90s and is continuing to disproportionately do so currently. So the future of the black farmer is at stake. And so if we don't talk about black farming and what it means, and most people when they think of cooperatives, think of small things and don't go, Land O'Lakes is a co-op. You can't buy an almond if you don't buy from a co-op. And if you can't even start that in the U.S., because we don't have cooperative laws in any southern state that actually lets you do that. You have to go register in Wisconsin or D.C., which means you are double taxed. That is an abuse. And so most people don't understand those things as abuses and think of things as minor, whereas white owners of large factory farms understand that is important. The last thing I just want to say is that there's lots of stats that I could give you. I decided not to do that today. And my family ran away from slavery from Natchez, Mississippi, and Georgia to Florida, and followed the Seminole Wars, and started their own black town called Cedartown in Florida. So we have access to land. The paper mill came in, decided to land there, and build a paper mill right where our land is. That means half the land is completely contaminated and is unable to grow food. My great aunt built her own house, taught us to build everything, and said you actually should never need anybody but your people to do anything, because she believed that you had to be able to be self-sufficient as a people. At every turn, we are being pushed and fought to give up our land. White people come in with scams to help us leave our land. And so until we understand their property rights and really push for that and really say how do people have a place to come home to when people's homes have been ripped from them, then we can't talk about economics. And trade is all about that. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Chimaringa Waller. I'm with the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement and the Africans Charged Genocide Working Group of that organization. I'd like to thank the working group for allowing me to speak here today and all the host organizations as well. I did want to comment a few minutes on the economic questions that the sister raised, and I'm going to talk about them in the context of where I live. I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. Most people don't even know where that is, but it's 240,000 people, 42,000 of them are African, and 71% of the Africans live at or below the poverty line. So we have a situation in St. Petersburg where you can't find a corner store owned by an African anymore. So I really think that the topic you raised is so important because I think Africans have to regain their sense of ownership, because I'd rather make $20,000 for myself than go work on a job for somebody else who can lay me off tomorrow, and that becomes a big factor. I worked, just to give you an example, there was a corner store owned by some Africans for probably 30 years. They sold it to some Palestinians. I went in there one day, and the guy who sold the store was in the store again. And I said, "Oh, you bought the store back?" He held his head down and he said, "No, I work for them." And I couldn't say a word. I was so stunned. And I think this is an example of how we kind of participate in disenfranchising ourselves economically. Because now you can't find a black corner store. And that used to be part of the central part of the economics inside the black community. But what you are seeing now happen is McDonald's and Burger King coming into the black community where they would never do that before. And we say that is not economic development, that is capital extraction. Because they can give you a job, take that capital and go back to the bank, deposit that money, but they call it economic development because they give you a job. But you don't own anything. So we say if these companies are coming into the black community needs to own 51% of it. That needs to happen. If we are going to have any kind of commerce in our community and control over our economics, that needs to happen. That's pretty much what I wanted to comment, because I think it was really important what the sister said. I wanted to appreciate that. So I'm going to be talking about police brutality and extrajudicial killings, and I wanted to discuss them in the context of some things that have happened outside of some of the cases that you've heard about, Eric Garner and Mike Brown and people like Kerry Ball in the St. Louis area. In 1996, before anybody ever heard of Ferguson, there was a young man named Tyron Lewis killed in the middle of the black community. 42 people witnessed it. There was a rebellion shortly after that murder. And it just so happened that this killing happened 3 blocks from our headquarters. So we were on the scene almost immediately, educating the people, passing out flyers. And it was a pretty intense situation, October 24, 1996. And this brother had been stopped in a so-called police stop. They said they suspected it was a stolen car. We've heard these stories before. So the cop gets in front of the car, demands that he get out. He won't get out of the car, so he shoots him twice. Once through the hand, once through the heart. And then he said, he tried to run me over. That's why I fired. So, state attorney, of course, eventually says it's justifiable homicide. And before they do that, they are going through a 3-week period of decision making. And on November 13th, they decide that they're going to come back with a grand jury decision. And the police are everywhere in the black community. They're riding 4 deep with shotguns sticking out of the car. The door is open in a very threatening manner in front of our office, up and down the street all day long. So about 12 o'clock comes, they start arresting members of our movement for things like, oh, you got an expired tag. Oh, you had a warrant from 2 years ago. So now they're arresting our movement. Our regular meeting happened that Wednesday at 6 o'clock. People are in the street now because the police are kind of agitating the people all up and down the main street in the black community. And people are outside our office. So we tell them to come inside for the meeting. 6 o'clock is approaching. It's about 150 people in there. And just as Chairman O'Malley Shatella, founder of our movement, starts to start the meeting, somebody comes in and says, the police say that we got to empty out this building because this is an illegal meeting. And if you don't leave, they're going to shoot tear gas at you. Before he could say, we're going to leave peacefully, tear gas starts flooding through the door. The room fills up with tear gas. People are scrambling and panicking and running for the back because we have a door that separates the back of the room. People are trying to find their children because now it's a big cloud of tear gas. Everybody's coughing. They get in the back. We go to the back room, and we are now separated from the tear gas, but we're trapped in this building. And the police have lined up across the street, about 300 strong. Police from the highway patrol, city of Clearwater, all over the area, they got these 300 cops lined up. And they're stopping people from coming to the meeting. So we try to get the people out the back door, they shoot tear gas in them to drive them back in. They finally are able to get out the back way, but we're still in the building. So we're kind of discussing it, trying to get some of the tear gas out of our eyes. And eventually, we make a break for it. And they start shooting tear gas at us. Now, there's a church across the street from our office. Our office is a 2-story building. By the time I went across the street, ran across the street to my car, I couldn't see our office anymore. There was so much tear gas. It was like a mushroom cloud of tear gas. We were to find out later that they used every canister of tear gas in the city of St. Petersburg on that building that night. And the city council people were complaining, saying you shouldn't have ran out of tear gas. That was the complaint. So this brother's life, Tyron Lewis, has really impacted the city of St. Petersburg. We believe it's genocide. We believe the United States should be charged with genocide. It's not a new problem. It's a 400-year-old problem since Africans were brought here. And we believe that if we look at some of these cases outside of the ones that are so popular, we will see things just as horrendous as what happened with Mike Brown, as what happened with Eric Garner. For 8 years, because of our work, we didn't see a police killing after the 1996 killing of Tyron Lewis, because we demanded economic development for our community. But in 2004, they started to attack us again. They killed a young brother named Jarrell Walker, shot him in the back as he awakened on the sofa. His son, baby son, was in the other room. 2005, they killed 17-year-old Markwell McCullough, shot at him 17 times and hit him 14 times. And then said, oops, he's the wrong person. Nobody was ever charged. By the way, St. Petersburg, Florida is kind of interesting. No police officer has ever been charged with killing an African in the city of St. Petersburg, ever. So, and this still stands today. So I think it's really important that we look at cases even like the Tyron Lewis's of the world, Javon Dawson, who was killed in 2008, shot in the back at a graduation party. That was justifiable homicide. Justifiable homicide is continually being put forward by the police as a justification for these murders. I think it's important to note that if you look at some of the other cases, more well-known cases, some of the same kind of factors are involved. For example, Tyron Lewis, they say they tried to run him, that he tried to run them over. So I want to thank you again for your attention, and hopefully I can answer any questions you have.
For Elandria, you mentioned living in an area where there was a paper mill. I just wanted to ask if you filed or considered filing any legal action, whether with the courts or with the administrative agencies. For instance, we talked to the Environmental Protection Agency while we were here. Not just at the federal level, but also at the state level, there may be some remedies available. If legal action was not considered, what might have prevented this particular option from being explored?
So people did file legal action. I have family members that are lawyers, and they filed. When the judge owns the paper mill, it is irrelevant. And that, to me, is what impacts most of the U.S. Is that the same people who are the judges, the same people who are the governors, are also the people that own the paper mills. They're the same people that own the oil companies. They're the same people who own everything, especially considering I live in Tennessee right now, and the governor of my state has the most oil things in the U.S. They own they own Pilot and was it the Flying J, which are they own more convenience stores in the United States. So even if you did want to file something, like I was also in a place in Kentucky where natural gas came through the water. Okay. And so we're drinking natural gas. And I'm sorry, I'm really sick because of all this. And some friends of mine are barely surviving because of natural gas and oil and things and water. And people drank it, and the person who hid it is the person who actually runs the county. And so they didn't tell anybody. When the radio station said it, they came after the radio station trying to shoot the people. And so it became a mess. And so, but I would say with the paper mill is that people did fight it. My family is also among the others in the land loss battles. And so at Pickford, there was a major Pickford lawsuit case that some people got money. The women, black women, didn't get their money. And so now there's another case that's been settled for the black women to get their money because they were told that they clearly couldn't be farmers. And they couldn't have this land because women didn't have that. Men did. And so it's not that legal action wasn't taken. It's a matter of who's in control, which is the same case for why people aren't indicted. And I think the area of Florida that St. Petersburg in, where some of my family are in, both there and in Tennessee, are some of the same areas where the #1 lynchings used to be in the South also. So they're dominated by a level of control that is hard to, I think, imagine. Yes, and I think you can see that in all of your countries too. But I hope that answered the question.
No question? No, thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank Elandria Some powerful stuff being presented here today. Glad that everybody here is bringing forth the type of things that they're bringing forth. One thing that came into my mind as I listened to the brother outline what happened in St. Peter's Florida, or St. Petersburg, Florida. We call this stuff police brutality. I think that's a nice name. That's a nice dressed up name. When he said they shot them canisters of tear gas in that building, I would call that police terrorism. I would call it what even Brother Malcolm said. He would say these were Gestapo tactics that are being used against our people throughout the United States. And it is a genocidal thing, and we need to call it that. We need to quit using the dressed up language when we talk about gentrification. No, we don't need to talk about gentrification. We need to talk about ethnic cleansing and make it plain so everybody can understand. And we don't need to use police brutality. We need to use police torture. We need to use police terrorism because these people act as terrorists. They occupy our communities, and that's the issue, ultimately. But I want to, we're going to move along in the program, but I wanted to bring to the working group's attention, there was a sister by the name of Ali Lester, a person with a disability. She couldn't stay and give testimony, but she provided me some documents to provide to you all so you can read about the plight of people with disabilities in Jackson. And specifically, I don't know if she put this in there, but it's a brother by the name of Timothy Ward that was hit and killed. He was hit by a car and killed on Christmas Day in Jackson because he had to ride his wheelchair in the street. A lot of areas in Jackson don't have sidewalks. Where you do have